The orange glow of re-entry faded from the viewport as Commander Han Taz's transport ship approached Station Nova 12. She pressed her face against the transparent barrier, taking in the massive structure that would be her home for the next year. The station's gleaming silver rings rotated slowly, maintaining artificial gravity for its 10,000 inhabitants. Tai ran her fingers through her short black hair, a nervous habit she'd developed during her test pilot days. The metal pinned to her chest, the one marking her as Earth's fastest pilot, felt heavier than usual. 3 times she'd broken the atmospheric speed record, and now here she was, about to teach aliens how to fly. The transport docked with a gentle thud. Ta gathered her few belongings and made her way to the airlock, her boots clicking against the metal floor. The station's artificial gravity felt slightly off, just enough to remind her she wasn't on Earth anymore. Commander Han Ta, a tall, blue-skinned alien, waited at the dock. His uniform bore the insignia of the Galactic Defense Force. "I am First Officer Cole. Welcome to Nova 12. Ta nodded, keeping her face neutral despite her fascination with his crystalline eyes. "Thank you, First Officer. I'm ready to meet my squadron. Of course, though I must warn you, they are somewhat concerned about having a human instructor." Cole led her through the station's curved corridors. "Your species is known for taking unnecessary risks. Those unnecessary risks helped us achieve faster-than-light travel 50 years ahead of schedule," Tai replied, remembering the stories of humanity's first FTL test pilots. Half of them had died pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Cole made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Yes, and that is precisely what worries them." They arrived at the training wing, where 12 alien pilots stood in perfect formation. Their heights varied, but all shared the same blue skin and crystal eyes as Cole. Each wore their uniform without a single wrinkle or crease. "Commander Tai," one stepped forward. "I am Wing Leader Pak. We are honored to learn from Earth's finest pilot." Tai studied their faces, noting the barely concealed skepticism in their expressions. "Thank you. I'd like to see your ships first, if possible." The hangar bay took her breath away. 12 fighters sat in precise rows, their silver hulls reflecting the overhead lights. Each ship was at least 2 generations ahead of anything Earth had produced. The smooth lines and advanced materials spoke of technological superiority that made her fingers itch to take control. "Beautiful," she whispered, walking up to the nearest fighter. "What's the thrust-to-weight ratio?" 15-1, Pak answered proudly. "Though we never push them beyond 10-1. It would be unsafe." Tai ran her hand along the ship's hull, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingers. "Unsafe. These birds could handle 20-1 without breaking a sweat." The aliens exchanged worried glances. One of them, younger than the others, spoke up. "But the safety protocols clearly state." "Safety protocols are guidelines, not prison walls," Tai interrupted. She popped open the cockpit and climbed in, settling into the pilot's seat. "Mind if I take her up?" "Now." Pak's crystal eyes widened. "Without studying the manuals first." Ta was already powering up the systems, her fingers dancing across the unfamiliar controls with practiced ease. "Best way to learn is by doing." "Anyone want to fly wing?" The younger pilot who had spoken earlier stepped forward. "I will, Commander. I am Pilot Lin." 10 minutes later, Tai's borrowed fighter shot out of the hangar bay with Lin following close behind. The stars stretched out before them, infinite possibilities in every direction. Ta felt the ship responding to her touches, learning its personality the way she had with every experimental craft she'd ever flown. "Watch this," she said over the comm, then threw the fighter into a series of maneuvers that had Lin gasping. The ship rolled and twisted through space, pushing well beyond the supposed safety limits, but well within its true capabilities. "Commander," Lin's voice crackled with alarm. "The stress indicators are red. But is anything actually breaking?" Tai asked, bringing her ship around in a tight loop that would have torn apart a human fighter. "These ships are amazing. They're just waiting for someone to really fly them. She demonstrated a few more maneuvers before returning to the hangar, where the other pilots waited with a mixture of horror and fascination on their faces. As she climbed out of the cockpit, Ta could see she had their attention at last. That was, Pac seemed to struggle for words. Unorthodox. That was flying. Ta corrected. Real flying, not just following numbers on a screen. These ships want to dance. They're just waiting for partners brave enough to lead. Looking at their faces, Ta could see the challenge ahead of her. These pilots had been trained to fear mistakes, to trust computers over instincts. But she saw something else too, a spark of curiosity, especially in Lin's eyes. Tomorrow, she announced, we start learning how to really fly. It won't be safe, it won't be comfortable, but I promise you this, it will be worth it. As the aliens filed out of the hangar, discussing her demonstration in hushed tones, Ta smiled to herself. She'd been worried about this assignment, about leaving Earth to teach aliens. Now she realized this was exactly where she needed to be. These pilots had the best ships in the galaxy. All they needed was someone to show them how to use them. And if there was one thing humans knew how to do, it was pushing boundaries. Ta took one last look at the fighters before heading to her quarters. Tomorrow would be interesting. She was going to teach these aliens how to stop flying like computers and start flying like pilots. They just didn't know it yet. Ta stood behind the simulator control station, watching 12 perfect formation flights execute 12 perfect landings. Not a single pilot deviated more than a millimeter from their assigned position. Their energy management was flawless, their speed control exact to the decimal point. It was driving her crazy. Excellent work, squad, Wing Leader Pac announced as the pilots emerged from their simulators. 0 errors, 0 deviations, 0 imagination. Ta muttered under her breath. Louder, she said, let's try something different. Combat scenario, 3 against 1. The aliens looked at each other uncertainly. Lin, the young pilot who had flown with her yesterday, stepped forward first. I volunteer, Commander. Good. Pick your 2 wingmen. Ta was already programming the simulator. You'll be defending against me. Lin chose 2 of the more experienced pilots. The 3 of them climbed back into their simulators while Ta took the 4th. As the virtual world formed around her, she smiled. This would be interesting. The scenario loaded. Deep space, a few scattered asteroids providing cover. The aliens' 3 fighters appeared on her radar, moving in textbook defensive formation. Begin, Ta commanded, then immediately threw her virtual fighter into a wild spin that looked like she'd lost control. The aliens maintained their formation, probably assuming she'd made a mistake. She hadn't. Using the spin's momentum, Ta whipped her ship around and dove straight through their formation before they could react. In the real world, such a maneuver would have subjected her to crushing G-forces, but these ships could handle it. She'd proven that yesterday. Commander, that exceeded safety parameters by 300%. Pac's voice came through the comm. Did I destroy my ship? Ta asked, already lining up her next attack run. Well, no, but then the parameters are wrong. She rolled her fighter between 2 of theirs, close enough that their shield bubbles would have touched in real life. All 3 alien ships broke formation, responding exactly as their training dictated. Ta picked them off one by one. The simulation ended 3 minutes later. Ta had destroyed all 3 ships without taking a single hit. She climbed out of the simulator to find the entire squadron staring at her. That was impossible, one of the pilots said. The computer says you pulled 25 Gs in that first turn. The ships can handle it, Ta replied. I checked the specifications myself last night. Your engineers built fighters that can withstand 30 Gs of stress. Why limit yourselves to 10? Because it is safe, Pac insisted. Because it is proven. Ta walked over to the main display and pulled up the replay. Watch this. Here, when Lin tried to evade. Good textbook move. By the way, he had a perfect shot at my engines, but he didn't take it because the angle wasn't in the manual. The aliens gathered around the screen, watching intently as she pointed out opportunity after opportunity they'd missed. She could see understanding beginning to dawn in some of their eyes. "Again," Lynn said suddenly. "Please, Commander, I want to try again." This time, Ty set up a one-on-one scenario. As soon as it began, she could see Lynn flying differently, still precise, but with more awareness of his ship's true capabilities. He still lost, but he lasted twice as long and even managed to score a glancing hit on her fighter. "Better," Ta said as they exited the simulators. "Much better. You started thinking instead of just following procedures." It felt. Lynn searched for the word. Alive. The ship felt alive. "Exactly." Ta turned to address the whole squadron. "These aren't cargo haulers. They're combat fighters. The best in the galaxy. But right now you're flying them like they're made of glass." She brought up the ship's specifications on the main screen. "Look at these numbers. The thrust vectoring alone gives you options your training never mentioned. The neural interface can handle input speeds far beyond what you're using. These ships want to fight. You just have to let them." "But the protocols," Pack began, "were written by people who never saw what these ships could really do," Ty interrupted. "I've spent my life testing the limits of experimental aircraft. Trust me when I say these fighters are being wasted." She programmed another simulation, this time displaying it on the main screen for everyone to watch. Her virtual fighter danced through an asteroid field, using maneuvers that made the aliens gasp. Every move pushed the ship to its limits, but never beyond them. "That's what these ships can do," she said as the demonstration ended. "That's what you can do, if you're willing to learn." Silence filled the simulator room. Ta could see the conflict on their faces, years of training warring with the evidence before their eyes. Finally, Lynn spoke up again. "Teach us," he said simply. One by one, the other pilots nodded. Even Pack, after a long moment, gave a reluctant nod of agreement. "Good," Ta smiled. "Because I've got something special planned for tomorrow's lesson. We're going to throw out the manual and start learning how to really fight." She dismissed the squadron, watching as they filed out while discussing what they'd seen. Many were gesturing with their hands, mimicking flight maneuvers she'd demonstrated. Seeds of change had been planted. Later, in her quarters, Tay reviewed the day's simulator data. Lynn's improvement after just one session was remarkable. He had natural talent, hidden under layers of overcautious training. The others showed promise too, in their own ways. "Computer," she called out, "show me the squadron's previous combat exercise records." Watching the recordings, she could see why the Galactic Defense Force had requested a human instructor. The aliens' rigid adherence to protocols made them predictable. In a real fight, predictability meant death. But that would change. She'd teach them to fly like humans, with instinct, with passion, with the understanding that sometimes you had to break the rules to stay alive. Tomorrow would be interesting. They'd start with basic combat maneuvers, then gradually work up to the kind of flying that had earned her those speed records back on Earth. These aliens were about to learn that there was more to flying than following a manual. Much more. The first distress call came during the night shift. Ty was in her quarters, reviewing flight data when the station's alarms blared to life. She was running toward the command center before the announcement finished. "Outpost 7-3 is under attack," First Officer Cole reported as she entered. "Unknown vessels, unknown configuration. They're not responding to hails." The tactical display showed 5 red dots swarming around the small outpost. As they watched, 3 defense satellites winked out of existence. "Those were our best automated defenses," Pack said, his crystal eyes reflecting the emergency lights. "Nothing should have been able to destroy them so quickly." Ty studied the attackers' movement patterns. "They're not following any known combat doctrine. Look at those turns. They're flying like." She trailed off, realizing what she was seeing. "Like what, Commander?" Lynn asked from his position at the tactical station. "Like humans," Ta said quietly. "Aggressive, unpredictable, ignoring standard patterns. That's why your defenses failed. They were programmed to counter conventional tactics. The raiders struck 2 more outposts over the next week. Each time, the standard response teams arrived too late. The unknown ships would appear suddenly, destroy their targets, and vanish before the Galactic Defense Force could mount an effective response. After the 4th attack, High Command called an emergency meeting. Ta stood before a panel of senior officers, most of whom looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. "Your squadron is the closest to the latest attack site," the admiral said, "but your pilot's performance records are concerning. They show numerous protocol violations and excessive risk-taking." "With respect, Admiral," Ta replied, "those violations have doubled their combat effectiveness. My pilots can match these raiders' maneuverability now." "By flying like savages," another officer muttered. "By flying like survivors," Ta corrected. "These raiders are using human-style tactics. It takes similar methods to counter them." The admiral studied her for a long moment. "You have one chance, Commander. Your squadron will patrol the sector containing Outpost 8-1. If the raiders appear, deal with them. But if you fail—" "We won't fail," Ta promised. Back on Nova 12, she gathered her pilots in the briefing room. 3 months of training had changed them. They sat alert, ready, no longer bound by rigid thinking. "The raiders are predicted to strike here," she pointed to the map. "We'll split into 3 groups. Lin, you'll lead Shadow Group. Pack, you have Strike Group. I'll take Hunt Group." "Standard patrol pattern?" one of the pilots asked. Ta smiled. "No, we're going to think like them. Predict where they'd hide, how they'd approach. Then we'll be waiting when they arrive." They launched an hour later, their fighters slipping into the darkness of space. Tad led her group into the shadow of a large asteroid, powering down non-essential systems to avoid detection. Hours passed. Tai was about to order a position change when Lin's voice crackled over the secure channel. "Contact. 6 raiders, approaching from Vector 317. All units, execute Plan Chaos," Ta commanded. Her fighters erupted from hiding, catching the raiders in a crossfire they never expected. The enemy ships were fast, maneuverable, but so were Ta's pilots now. They'd learned to fly with instinct instead of computers. Lin's group struck from below, forcing the raiders to break formation. Pack's team cut off their retreat. Tad led the final attack run herself, her ship dancing through enemy fire like it was part of her own body. "Watch their pattern," she called out. "They're flying aggressive but predictable. Use it against them." The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, 4 raider ships were destroyed, 1 was disabled, and 1 had fled. None of Ta's pilots were lost, though several ships showed battle damage. "Excellent work, all of you," she said as they escorted the captured raider ship back to Nova 12. "Especially you, Lin. That opening move was perfect." "I saw an opportunity and took it," Lin replied. "Like you taught us." The captured raider yielded valuable intelligence. The attackers were a splinter group, using stolen technology and desperate tactics. More importantly, the battle proved that Ta's methods worked. High Command was forced to acknowledge her success. Within days, other squadrons were requesting her training programs. The raiders' advantage of unconventional tactics was gone. In her quarters that night, Tay received a message from Earth Command. They wanted her to extend her stay, to help develop a new combat doctrine combining human instincts with alien technology. She looked out her viewport at the fighters being repaired in the hangar. 3 months ago, those ships had been flown like expensive computers. Now they were true combat vessels, flown by pilots who understood that real space combat wasn't about following rules. It was about survival. "Computer, send response," she said. "Message begins. I accept the extension. These pilots still have much to learn, and so do I." Message ends. Outside, Lin was leading a group of pilots through combat drills, their ships moving with grace and power that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. Ta watched them with pride. The raiders had taught them all an important lesson. The galaxy wasn't safe, and protocols couldn't cover every situation. Sometimes you had to trust your instincts and fly with your heart as much as your head. She had more to teach them, and now she had time to do it properly. The next attack would find them even better prepared. The raiders had wanted to teach the Galactic Defense Force fear. Instead, they taught them how to really fly. "Feel the ship," Ta called out as 12 fighters danced through the asteroid field. "Stop looking at your instruments and feel how she moves." Lin's fighter rolled gracefully between two spinning rocks, finally starting to show the natural flow Ta had been pushing for. Behind him, other pilots were struggling to break free from their instrument dependency. "My readings show optimal path variance of 13%. Pack reported, his ship moving with mechanical precision. "Forget the numbers." Ta spun her fighter in a tight spiral, using the asteroid's gravity to slingshot past him. "The ship is telling you everything you need to know. Listen to her." They'd been at this for 2 weeks since the raider attack. Every day, Ta pushed them further from their comfort zone. Today's lesson was about natural flight, moving with space instead of fighting against it. "Commander," one of the pilots called out in alarm, "my proximity warnings air." The sound of scraping metal rang through the comm as his wing clipped an asteroid. No serious damage, but enough to make everyone tense up. "Keep flying," Tai ordered. "Minor scratches are part of learning. You're not going to die from a bruised paint job." She led them deeper into the field, where the rocks were closer together. Her fighter wove through the gaps like water flowing around stones. Some of her pilots were starting to copy her movements, though most still relied too heavily on their computers. "Watch this," she said, cutting power to her instruments. Pure feeling, no computers. Her fighter came alive under her hands. Without digital distractions, she could sense every current in space, every gravitational pull. The ship responded to her lightest touch, dancing between asteroids with fluid grace. "That's impossible," Pack protested. "The navigational calculations alone would require." "No calculations," Tai interrupted. "Just instinct. Your bodies know more about movement than any computer. Trust them." Lin was the first to try it. His fingers hesitated over the shutdown sequence, then pressed the buttons. His flying was jerky at first, but slowly smoothed out as he learned to trust his senses. "It's different," he reported. "I can feel everything. The ship, the space around us, all of it." One by one, other pilots followed his example. There were more scrapes, more close calls, but also moments of surprising beauty as they began to understand what Tai was teaching them. Back in the hangar, maintenance crews grumbled about the scuffed paint and bent panels. Tai ignored them. "Better to learn these lessons here than in combat. Tomorrow," she announced to her tired but excited squadron, "we start combat dancing." "Combat? Dancing?" Pact looked confused. "Fighting isn't about mathematical solutions," Tai explained. "It's about rhythm, flow, reading your opponent's energy, like a dance." The next day, she paired them up for mock dogfights. No weapons, just practice at reading each other's movements. Lin and Pack faced off first, their ships circling cautiously. "Stop thinking," Ta called out. "Feel the energy flow. Where will he be, not where is he?" Slowly, the pilots began to understand. Their movements became more fluid, more natural. They learned to predict each other's actions by feeling rather than calculating. Even Pack was improving. After a particularly smooth evasion, he admitted, "I'm starting to understand. The ship. It tells you things the computers miss." "Exactly," Ta grinned. "Now you're getting it." They practiced for hours each day. There were accidents, minor collisions, overshot maneuvers, the occasional emergency landing, but their skills grew exponentially. "Watch their energy," Tai taught them. "Every ship has a rhythm. Learn to read it, and you'll know their next move before they do." She demonstrated by taking on 3 pilots at once, her fighter flowing around their attacks like smoke in the wind. No computers, no calculations, just pure instinct and understanding of spatial dynamics. By the end of the month, the squadron was transformed. Their movements combined alien precision with human fluidity. They could switch between computer-assisted and natural flight seamlessly, using each when appropriate. During one practice session, Ta watched Lin lead half the squadron through a complex series of maneuvers that would have been impossible a month ago. His ships moved in perfect harmony, reading and responding to each other without a word being spoken. "Beautiful," she murmured. "They're finally dancing." Even High Command had to admit the improvement. Combat simulations showed their effectiveness had increased by over 300%. More importantly, they were unpredictable now. No enemy could calculate their movements because they didn't follow mathematical patterns anymore. "I was wrong," Pac told her after a particularly successful exercise. "I thought flying was about control, but it's about freedom within control." Ta nodded. "The best pilots find balance between precision and instinct. You're all getting there." That evening, she watched from her office as her pilots practiced voluntarily, eager to perfect their new skills. Their ships moved through space with growing confidence, each flight smoother than the last. They weren't just pilots anymore. They were artists, painting with motion and energy in the canvas of space. The scratches on their ships were badges of honor now, marks of lessons learned and boundaries pushed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new skills to master. But Ta knew they were ready. They had learned to dance with their ships, to feel the music of space itself. The next raiders who faced them wouldn't find predictable, by-the-book pilots. They would find dancers, warriors who moved with the grace of natural law and the precision of advanced technology. They had learned to really fly. The alert siren shattered the pre-dawn quiet on Nova 12. Ta was in the hangar in minutes, finding her pilots already scrambling to their ships. The tactical display told a grim story. 15 raider vessels attacking civilian station Echo, with more appearing by the second. "Communications are being jammed," Pac reported as they launched. "We can't reach High Command." "We're all they've got," Ta responded, leading her squadron toward the battle. "Time to show what you've learned." They dropped out of jump speed to find chaos. The civilian station's outer ring was already damaged, escape pods streaming away from its ports. Raiders swarmed around it like angry wasps, picking off the fleeing civilians one by one. "Standard response protocol calls for defensive formation Delta," Pac said, his voice tense. "We should. There are 23 raiders now." Lin cut in. Delta formation would be suicide. Tai watched her pilots closely. This was the moment. Follow their training or trust their new instincts. "Your call, Lin," she said quietly. "You've got the best feel for this. What does your gut tell you?" For a moment, there was silence on the comm. Then Lin's fighter rolled into an attack position. "Follow me in." Dance pattern Sierra. Full improvisation. Ta smiled as her squadron formed up behind Lin. They'd chosen well. "Weapons free," Lin commanded. "Pick your partners and dance." The squadron split apart like mercury drops, each ship flowing into its own rhythm. They struck the raiders from multiple angles, using the techniques Ta had taught them. Lin led 3 fighters in a spinning attack that scattered the raiders' formation. His ship moved like water, impossible to track or predict. The raiders' targeting computers couldn't lock onto the erratic movements. "Keep them off balance," Todd called out, her own fighter diving through the chaos. "They're expecting protocols. Show them something new." A raider exploded as Pac caught it in a crossfire, his precision combining perfectly with another pilot's aggressive maneuvers. More raiders fell as the squadron found their rhythm, moving together like a deadly ballet. Then things went wrong. They've breached the station's inner ring. Someone shouted. "They're boarding." "Lin, take 4 ships and protect those escape pods," Tai ordered. "Everyone else with me. We're going to show these raiders how humans protect civilians." She led her group straight toward the station's breach point, where raiders were trying to dock. Traditional tactics called for holding back, establishing a perimeter. Instead, Tai's pilots dove into point-blank range. "Feel the space," she reminded them. "Dance with death." Their fighters spun through gaps barely wider than their wings, firing with impossible accuracy. 2 raider ships exploded before they could react. A third tried to escape and flew straight into Pack's carefully planned crossfire. Lin's group was doing equally well, turning the space around the escape pods into a killing ground. His ships moved in perfectly coordinated chaos, protecting the civilians while picking off raiders one by one. "Station security reports boarders in Section 12. Pack announced. "They're heading for the control center." "Not if we can help it," Tai replied. She lined up her fighter with a damaged section of the station's hull. "Watch and learn, people." Her ship's weapons carved a new hole in the station's skin, perfectly positioned. The explosive decompression sucked the boarding party into space before they could react. "Commander," Lin called out, "6 more raiders just jumped in." "Perfect," Ta said, surprising everyone. "Now we can show them our final. Remember the asteroid field training." Understanding flowed through the squadron. As one, they cut power to their tactical computers, flying purely by instinct and feel. Their ships began moving in ways that defied prediction or analysis. The raiders couldn't cope with the squadron's fluid style. Their targeting systems were useless against pilots who flew like this. One by one, they began to fall. Lin led a series of attacks that seemed to defy physics, his ship flowing through spaces that shouldn't have been possible to navigate. The raiders trying to chase him crashed into each other or fell into carefully planned traps. "Station reports boarders neutralized," Pack announced. "All civilian pods are away safe." The remaining raiders, realizing they'd lost the advantage, tried to retreat, but Tai's pilots had learned too well. They pursued the fleeing ships with terrible grace, their movements beautiful and deadly. When it was over, 28 raider ships had been destroyed or captured. The civilian station was damaged but intact. Most importantly, not a single civilian had been lost. "Report," Ta called out as they regrouped. 3 fighters with minor damage," Pack replied. "No serious casualties." He paused. "We did it, Commander. We really did it." "No," Ta corrected him. "You did it. Every one of you. You chose to trust yourselves instead of your protocols, and you saved thousands of lives because of it." They escorted the civilian station to safety, their ships moving in loose formation, no longer bound by rigid patterns, but flowing naturally through space. Later, as they landed back at Nova 12, Ta watched her pilots climb from their fighters. They moved differently now, with confidence born of trial by fire. They had faced their greatest test and emerged stronger. "Good dancing today," she told them with a smile. "Especially you, Lin. That was some beautiful improvisation." Lin nodded, understanding. "I finally heard the music, Commander. We all did." Looking at her squadron, Ta saw what they had become. Not just pilots, but artists of space and combat. They had learned to trust their instincts while maintaining their precision. They had learned to dance with their ships and with death itself. The raiders had given them their ultimate test, and they had passed with flying colors. More importantly, they had proven that the combination of human instinct and alien technology was unbeatable. They weren't just pilots anymore. They were dancers among the stars. The news of the squadron's victory spread through the Galactic Defense Force like wildfire. Within days, other commanders were requesting information about their tactics. Ta found herself suddenly at the center of a revolution in space combat. "Show us again," the Admiral requested, watching the battle recordings for the 3rd time. "How did your pilots anticipate those raider movements?" "They didn't calculate them," Ta explained. "They felt them. When you spend enough time dancing with your ship, you start to read the dance patterns of others." The briefing room was packed with senior officers from across the sector. On the main screen, Lin's fighter performed maneuvers that seemed to ignore physics itself. But the risk factors, one commander protested. The potential for accidents is far less than the certainty of defeat if we keep flying by numbers alone. Pak interrupted. He stood beside Ta now, no longer the rigid wing leader he'd once been. Our squadron has proven that. The evidence was undeniable. In the month since the civilian station battle, Ta's pilots had engaged raiders 12 more times. They hadn't lost a single fight or pilot. The raiders are already changing their tactics, Lin reported, bringing up new tactical data. They're trying to adapt to our style. But they can't, because they don't understand the fundamental principle. Which is? The Admiral asked. That space combat isn't just math, Tai answered. It's art. It's music. It's feeling the currents of gravity and energy that flow between the stars. She brought up training footage showing her pilots practicing their new techniques. Their ships moved like schools of fish, each responding instantly to the others without need for commands or calculations. Look at their efficiency ratings, she pointed out. Higher than any squadron in the fleet. But more importantly, look at their unpredictability scores. No enemy can calculate their moves because they're not following formulas anymore. The changes began slowly at first. 2 squadrons requested training in the new methods. Then 5 more. Within weeks, pilots from across the galaxy were arriving at Nova 12 to learn what they called the human dance. Ta watched from the observation deck as Lin led a training session. Her former student had become a master teacher himself, showing others how to break free from rigid thinking and trust their instincts. Remember when you thought I was crazy? She asked Pak, who stood watching beside her. He made the chirping sound that passed for alien laughter. I still think you're crazy, Commander. But now I understand that sometimes crazy is exactly what we need. Below them, the training squadron was practicing blind flying. No instruments, no computers, just pure feeling and instinct. Some were struggling, but others were beginning to understand. They're learning faster than we did, Lin noted as he joined them after the session. Maybe because they've seen what's possible now. The raiders were learning too, but too slowly. Their attacks became less frequent as more squadrons adopted the new combat style. Those that did attack found themselves facing pilots who moved like forces of nature instead of machines. One morning, Tai received a message that made her smile. High Command was officially adopting her methods as standard training for all combat pilots. They were calling it Integrated Intuitive Combat Protocol, which made her laugh, since it was exactly the opposite of a protocol. What will you do now, Commander? Lin asked when she shared the news. Return to Earth. Ta looked out at the stars, thinking about the test flights and speed records that had once seemed so important. No, she said finally. My place is here. There's still so much to teach and to learn. She watched her original squadron running training exercises, their ships moving with fluid grace through space. They had grown so far beyond their initial rigid patterns. Now they were artists, warriors, and dancers all at once. Besides, she added with a smile, someone has to keep pushing the boundaries. Show everyone what's really possible out here. The next generation of pilots would grow up learning both precision and instinct from the start. They would understand that space combat wasn't about following rules or calculating odds. It was about feeling the flow of battle and moving with it. High Command wants to create an advanced training facility here, Pak mentioned. They're calling it the Dance Academy. Ta laughed at that. Well, I suppose it's better than crazy human flying school. She watched as a new group of trainees arrived, their ships moving with the careful precision she remembered from her first days here. Soon, they would learn to break free from those limitations, to find the beauty in chaos and the strength in instinct. You know what the raiders' biggest mistake was? She asked her former students. Attacking the civilian station, Lin suggested. No, Ta smiled. Their biggest mistake was thinking that perfect calculations would always beat human instinct. They forgot that the best computers in the galaxy are the ones we're born with, our minds and our hearts. The stars stretched out before them, infinite in their possibilities. Somewhere out there, New challenges waited, but now the Galactic Defense Force was ready for them, armed with a perfect blend of alien technology and human spirit. Outside, Lin was leading a group of pilots through combat drills, their ships moving with grace and power that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. Tai watched them with pride. The Raiders had taught them all an important lesson. The galaxy wasn't safe, and protocols couldn't cover every situation. Sometimes you had to trust your instincts and fly with your heart as much as your head. She had more to teach them, and now she had time to do it properly. The next attack would find them even better prepared. The Raiders had wanted to teach the Galactic Defense Force fear. Instead, they taught them how to really fly. Feel the ship, Ta called out as 12 fighters danced through the asteroid field. Stop looking at your instruments and feel how she moves. Lin's fighter rolled gracefully between two spinning rocks, finally starting to show the natural flow Tai had been pushing for. Behind him, other pilots were struggling to break free from their instrument dependency. My readings show optimal path variance of 13%. Pack reported, his ship moving with mechanical precision. Forget the numbers. Ta spun her fighter in a tight spiral, using the asteroid's gravity to slingshot past him. The ship is telling you everything you need to know. Listen to her. They'd been at this for 2 weeks since the Raider attack. Every day, Ta pushed them further from their comfort zone. Today's lesson was about natural flight, moving with space instead of fighting against it. Commander, one of the pilots called out in alarm. My proximity warnings air. The sound of scraping metal rang through the comm as his wing clipped an asteroid. No serious damage, but enough to make everyone tense up. Keep flying, Tai ordered. Minor scratches are part of learning. You're not going to die from a bruised paint job. She led them deeper into the field, where the rocks were closer together. Her fighter wove through the gaps like water flowing around stones. Some of her pilots were starting to copy her movements, though most still relied too heavily on their computers. Watch this, she said, cutting power to her instruments. Pure feeling, no computers. Her fighter came alive under her hands. Without digital distractions, she could sense every current in space, every gravitational pull. The ship responded to her lightest touch, dancing between asteroids with fluid grace. That's impossible, Pack protested. The navigational calculations alone would require. No calculations, Tai interrupted. Just instinct. Your bodies know more about movement than any computer. Trust them. Lin was the first to try it. His fingers hesitated over the shutdown sequence, then pressed the buttons. His flying was jerky at first, but slowly smoothed out as he learned to trust his senses. It's different, he reported. I can feel everything. The ship, the space around us, all of it. One by one, other pilots followed his example. There were more scrapes, more close calls, but also moments of surprising beauty as they began to understand what Tai was teaching them. Back in the hangar, maintenance crews grumbled about the scuffed paint and bent panels. Tai ignored them. Better to learn these lessons here than in combat. Tomorrow, she announced to her tired but excited squadron, we start combat dancing. Combat? Dancing? Pack looked confused. Fighting isn't about mathematical solutions, Tai explained. It's about rhythm, flow, reading your opponent's energy, like a dance. The next day, she paired them up for mock dogfights. No weapons, just practice at reading each other's movements. Lin and Pack faced off first, their ships circling cautiously. Stop thinking. Ta called out. Feel the energy flow. Where will he be? Not where is he. Slowly, the pilots began to understand. Their movements became more fluid, more natural. They learned to predict each other's actions by feeling rather than calculating. Even Pack was improving. After a particularly smooth evasion, he admitted, I'm starting to understand. The ship. It tells you things the computers miss. Exactly, Ta grinned. Now you're getting it.